Sodom and Gomorrah have been found? Time and time again, I'll stumble across sensational headlines or have people send me articles like this one in an attempt to prove to me that the Bible is true. Have Sodom and Gomorrah been found? Well, the problem with this kind of article is that not only is it deliberately sensational in an attempt to get more views, but as soon as you open it up and actually read the article, almost invariably the actual discovery is far less conclusive. But before we dive in, we should probably first recap the story of Sodom. Sodom and Gomorrah, according to the biblical account, were two extremely sinful cities. God planned to wipe them out, but first sends two angels to Sodom to warn the one righteous man living there, Lot, to flee with his family. The townsmen of Sodom, seeing the gorgeous angels, attempt to non-consensually fiddly-doop their angelic poop shoots. But Lot, being a righteous man, asks the villagers not to and offers them his virgin daughters instead. They refuse, so the angels strike the Sodomites blind, and Lot flees to the nearby town of Zor. God torches the town with flaming sulfur and smashes it to smithereens the way you should be smashing that like button right now. Lot's poor wife stops to look back at the town. The audacity. So God turns her into a block of salt. Lot then hides out in a cave and, being a righteous man, gets drunk and knocks up his daughters. So, did archaeologists actually find proof of the city of Sodom? Well, this is an article about the site of edh-Dhra, where archaeologists found a massive Bronze Age gravesite next to the Dead Sea. There's a sister city called Numaira close by that was also destroyed during the early Bronze Age, a possible candidate for the city of Gomorrah. And while these cities seem to fit the biblical description for the location of Sodom and Gomorrah, there are a number of big problems. First, the skeletons found at the gravesite didn't die all at once, but rather over the course of centuries. They were laid to rest at a burial site, and over hundreds of years, even the types of tombs they used changed with the culture. These people were given a proper burial, and they didn't die in a catastrophe. A few of the buildings did show signs of fire damage, but that wasn't the cause of death for the people found buried there. For example, one of the burial houses did catch fire, but an analysis of the skulls of the three people found inside showed that their deaths were due to sharp stab wounds, not immolation. Furthermore, unlike the Bible's description of Sodom and Gomorrah, Numaira and edh-Dhra weren't destroyed at the same time, but rather 250 years apart. And the nail in the coffin that this city is not the biblical city of Sodom is that the city was destroyed in the early Bronze Age, hundreds of years before the biblical dates of Sodom, and even before the dates prescribed by young earth creationists for Noah's flood. This site was occupied for over 1,000 years, and there were roughly 500,000 bodies that were buried over that time period at the edh-Dhra burial site. So even if the experts were wrong about the destruction date, if this was the biblical city of Sodom, then during the time period that the Bible has a global flood wiping out everyone on Earth, this city shows signs of uninterrupted occupation for over a millennium, stretching all the way back to hundreds of years before the flood. I guess nobody gave them the memo that they were supposed to be drowning underwater. And given that according to the Bible, Sodom was allegedly destroyed just 11 generations after the biblical flood killed all but 8 people on Earth, just for there to be 500,000 people on the planet this quickly after a near total apocalypse, let alone in one burial site, these people would have had to have reproduced at an absolutely insane rate.
Multiplying with an average litter of 10, producing a new generation every 12 hours over a period of 3 days.
Let's say that they had the same birth rate as Niger, which boasts the highest fertility rate in the world. Now let's assume that everyone is fertile. Let's ignore violent deaths and wars, and let's ignore the fact that infant mortality rates would have been off the charts. Loads of women would have been dying in childbirth, and without modern medicine, most people wouldn't live to see their 30s. If you generously grant the Bible all of these absurd impossibilities and allow the human population to grow over 1,000% faster than archaeological experts estimate that the global population actually grew at this time, then in this extreme humans are nothing but invincible baby mills scenario, you could just barely squeeze out 500,000 people on the entire planet in this time, only to have them wiped out by God raining down fire from heaven, literally just a few generations after he promised to never wipe out all of humanity by raining down water. Also, how are there so many people clustered in one city when God literally just dispersed everyone across the globe a few generations earlier for trying to cluster in a city to build the Tower of Babel? And remember, this is all in just one city. By this point, the Bible's mentioned a ton of other cities, so whether or not this is Sodom, the 500,000 bodies found at edh-Dhra presents an insurmountable problem for biblical literalists. Now, because there are so many major discrepancies with the biblical account, edh-Dhra isn't the only place proposed by creationists to be the city of Sodom. There's a city north of the Dead Sea called Tall El-Hammam, which may have been destroyed by a naturally occurring meteor blast similar to the one that slammed into Russia in 2013. And it's possible that this or a similar event was the inspiration for the story of Sodom and Gomorrah. After all, failing to understand the physics behind natural disasters like earthquakes, meteors, and volcanoes, early humans often falsely attributed these as divine wrath and claimed they were punishment for egregious sins. But the moment one Bible scholar proposed Tall El-Hammam to potentially be the site of Sodom, other biblical literalists immediately shot it down because it doesn't literally fit the time and location the Bible gives for Sodom, which could pose significant problems for the inerrancy of the Bible. Also, even the Christian archaeologists excavating Tall El-Hammam admit that the site shows signs of continuous occupation going back 2,500 years before the date of its destruction. In other words, people were flourishing here a couple hundred years before most young Earth creationists claimed that the Earth was created, and the residents of this city didn't seem at all to be affected by the global flood that was supposed to have wiped them out. But the claims of biblical archaeologists don't stop there. On both sides of the Dead Sea, there are caves which people without any evidence claim to be the cave that Lot got drunk in after fleeing Sodom. But what most of these people aren't aware of is just how many caves there are in Israel. This small country boasts over 1,200 caves, and those are just the ones that we know about. Finding a cave in the general vicinity of the Dead Sea isn't exactly remarkable. With no perfect candidate for the city of Sodom, creationists were getting desperate, and even resorted to scouring the bottom of the Dead Sea in a rinky-dink submarine, believing that upon its destruction, Sodom could have slipped into the sea. Budget James Cameron here spotted a small, oddly shaped lump and declared that because it sort of looked man-made, then they may have found evidence of Sodom. The problem with headlines that use words like might or may have is they don't state the probability of the claim and also might not. But headlines like archaeologists may not have just discovered Sodom are far less sensational and eye-grabby and less likely to be shared by creationists. The Holy Land has a rich history going back millennia with thousands of cities, towns, forts, temples, and settlements scattered far and wide. Almost everywhere you dig, you're bound to find something. On top of internal skirmishes between local Canaanite towns and chiefdoms, this land was surrounded by the Assyrians, the Hittites, the Egyptians, the Philistines, and later changed hands like a hot potato between the Persians, Greeks, Seleucids, Maccabees, Romans, Arabs, and others. Cities were constantly being sacked and rebuilt, oftentimes destroyed with fire. So if you show up in this region with the Bible and a checklist of city close to the Dead Sea with lots of dead bodies that was destroyed by fire, you're bound to have multiple hits. Now you could write a sensational article at this point for each one saying, did archaeologists just find proof of Sodom and Gomorrah? But you're not doing your due diligence. Even finding a city in this region dating to the right time period with signs of destruction by fire is hardly conclusive evidence of anything more than that a city from this time period was destroyed by fire. To say anything more conclusive, a professional archaeologist must gather more evidence, analyze it scientifically, and look at the big picture. What else have we found that dates to around that time period that can offer us clues about this civilization? Are there any written records from this time? What do we know about this and neighboring cultures from this time period based on archaeological findings? Remember, the earliest written accounts we have in the Bible date to over 1,000 years later, so we're looking for more contemporary accounts. What do we know about this and neighboring cultures from this time period based on archaeological findings? Not all evidence is created equal, so everything must be taken with a grain of Lot's wife and loads of healthy skepticism. But wait, what's this? I've got it all wrong? Sodom and Gomorrah have been found by the legendary maverick Ron Wyatt? Not Ron Wyatt! Please don't tell me I have to take on such a giant in the field of amateur archaeology. Fine, if you insist, I'll cover that in Sodom and Gomorrah Part 2. But only if this video gets 100,000 likes and 10 million views. Because I'm a whore! Either way, subscribe and hit the notification bell so that you don't miss it. This video was brought to you by you.
Target every person in Paris with the name you.
Seriously, it's because of your per video pledges on Patreon and one-time PayPal donations that me and my team are able to do this full time and push back against pseudoscience and promote skepticism and reason and rationality and critical thinking and science and all of the fun stuff. I'll put links to various ways that you can support the show below. Thank you so much, and as always, dare to be curious, but don't drink the Kool-Aid.